Hello, and welcome to the Field Guides. I'm Steve, and I'm here with Bill. Good evening, Bill.
Good evening, Steve.
What we're going to do today, well, not really, is give you the experience of what it's like to be out in the field, in the woods, and on the trail. What we usually do is we pick a science topic, do research on that topic, take you out into the field, and share with you everything we learn. Well, this episode's a little bit different. First of all, Daniel wasn't able to join us.
No, it's a Daniel-free episode.
Yeah. So all you Daniel haters, here's one for you. No, but actually, Bill and I went to New York City to meet up with an old friend and a couple of his colleagues. And Bill, do you want to give a little background on that?
Sure. So a few weeks ago, J. Jean Rose Burney, who some of you may recognize that name, he's been on the podcast before. He used to work for the Western New York Land Conservancy, and he was actually the first one from the Conservancy to reach out to us. And we did a few episodes with the Conservancy on properties that they were looking to preserve. But he's since moved on to an organization called Jocotoco USA. Now, he's working for the American branch of an organization based in Ecuador called Fundación Jocotoco. And they are a non-governmental conservation organization. And he wanted us to help spread the word about a project that they're involved with in the Galapagos Islands. And when he first contacted me and started talking about it, part of me was like, oh my God, we're going to the Galapagos.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that did not happen.
You know what? New York City was pretty fun, though.
Right.
It was Climate Week, right? So I think that's why they were there.
Yes. The project that he wanted to talk about is taking place in the Galapagos Islands on the island of Floreana. And it's going to be one of the largest rewilding efforts on any tropical island in the world.
Wow.
So he had us come to New York City, and we sat down with J. Jean and two staff members from Fundación Jocotoco. The first was Julieta Munoz, and the second was Paula Sengo-Key. And I'll let them introduce their job titles and what they do for Jocotoco in the episode. You'll first hear them talk about Jocotoco in general and what that great organization has been doing in Ecuador and South America. And then we'll focus on the Rewilding Floreana project for the second half of the episode.
So now we're going to cut away to a New York City apartment, and then after the interview, you'll hear back from us on our windy train tracks back in Buffalo.
All right, folks, enjoy.
All right.
I am here with Steve, and we are, for the first time as the Field Guides, in New York City.
Yeah, in an echoey New York City apartment.
And we are here with J. Jean, Julieta, and Paula, and they are going to give us a quick introduction to their full names, their positions, and then we're going to launch into it. So J. Jean, take it away.
Sure, Phil. Thanks for this again. So I'm J. Jean Rose. I'm the director of Jocotoco US, and Jocotoco is spelled with a J, so they spell it wrong. I'm from Western New York originally. I used to work at the Western New York Land Conservancy, and so I probably know a lot of you out there listening. I've been with Jocotoco for a little bit less than a year. Jocotoco is an Ecuadorian conservation organization, and it's been pretty cool working in the Amazon and the Andes and the Galapagos for the last year.
Pretty cool.
It's all right. It's all right.
And then Julieta, if you could tell us more about Jocotoco.
Yeah, so my name is Julieta Munoz. I work as the strategy manager at Fundación Jocotoco. I've been in the organization for almost 4 years. It's been a very nice experience. My background is in tourism. I worked for my family business for 12 years, and then after the pandemic we closed. So yeah, but I'm very excited of working in conservation. I've traveled quite a bit in Ecuador, to many places in Ecuador, to all the 4 regions, and now working in conservation. It's been very great.
And my own curiosity, how did you go from tourism into what you're doing now?
Well, tourism is related to conservation. In my family, we did sustainable tourism or ecotourism. So my father was always, into that field of protecting nature, and we did nature tourism. So it was not such a big jump. And I have a master's degree in environmental science. So it kind of made sense to actually work in that after many years.
It's an easy pivot.
Yeah.
Right. So could you tell us more about, just some more details about what Jocotoco does in Ecuador and in the region?
So Jocotoco started in 1998. as a conservation foundation. It was established to protect a specific bird. At the time, the Jocotoco anpita was discovered by a group of ornithologists led by Bob Ridgely. They were doing research to make a field guide about birds in Ecuador, and in one of those expeditions in the south of Ecuador, they discovered these new species, the Jocotoco anpita. And because of that, they established the Jocotoco Foundation. They purchased the first piece of land in Tapichalaca Reserve to protect this bird, which is endemic. And after that, they started to establish reserves in other areas of Ecuador where there were threatened and endangered species. As I said, initially focused on birds, but then our aim is to protect threatened ecosystems, not only specific species. So now after 25 years, we have a network of 18 reserves. We protect over 40,000 hectares in all of Ecuador, including the Galapagos.
That's 100,000 acres for you.
I was just
Yeah, thank you.
for American listeners.
Yeah, for Americans.
And we protect all different types of ecosystem: forest, paramo, grassland, wetlands, marine reserves. So a little bit of everything. And our focus is, like I said, to protect threatened species. And to do that, we work with communities, we work with the government, local governments, the national parks, and other organizations as well. So we have created a very good network in Ecuador to protect the biodiversity. Ecuador is one of the most biodiverse countries in the world. So we have a very big task to protect that for everyone.
This is our 25th anniversary too, and it's amazing how important this organization has become, impactful. You know, small local organization now working across an entire country, protecting more land than any other, not-for-profit in that area, and then working in the oceans, in the Galapagos, in the Amazon, in the Andes.
In 25 years.
In 25 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty spectacular.
Amazing. Wow.
I don't know if I should admit this, but before reading up on this episode, I guess I didn't know that the Galapagos was part of Ecuador.
No one does. No one
I didn't either.
No one is aware.
I'm always really willing to embarrass myself, but I'm glad that one isn't something that a ton of people are aware of. So.
Ecuador's in South America. For all that.
See, I knew that.
I actually started working for Jocotoco before I'd ever been to South America. So I worked in Western New York and Costa Rica and Mexico in conservation. Mm-hmm. And I interviewed for this job last year, and it was all remote. So I got the job, still working out of my living room in Washington, D.C. Worked for 4 months before I'd met a single person that I work with.
Wow.
And it wasn't until last March, 4 months later, that I finally went down to Ecuador and visited Ecuador. So,
welcome to the post-COVID world.
Yeah. They haven't sent me to the Galapagos yet, but that's next.
Yeah.
You can bring us too.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah.
Don't be shy about it.
Yeah. Let's see how much money we raise.
Okay. So, Paula, would you tell us about yourself and then about what Jocotoco is doing in the Galapagos?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Paola Sangolki. I am from the Galapagos Island, from Santa Cruz Island. I grew up there surrounded by the ocean. The ocean was still my backyard, and I can proudly say that. And I guess that growing up surrounded by nature somehow leads you towards protecting it. You don't protect what you don't know, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. So I am a marine biologist. I'm supporting several projects in the islands. I support the surfing club there. I'm a mom. I'm a young professional, still young, from the islands. I had to go back. I have to travel to mainland to study because at the moment there weren't any actually universities in the islands. Now things are changing for good. So I went there, I got my degree as a marine biologist. I have a master's in biology and society, and I'm currently pursuing a PhD program, hanging in there. That's a sensitive topic, but
You got this.
yeah. And so I'm also have the privilege to work for Jocotoco as the marine conservation coordinator for the Galapagos program. So in the island, we basically work hand with hand with the environmental authority. We have a cooperation agreement to work with them in several projects to support decision making, to support sustainable management. What I like about Jocotoco is that we not only conduct a specific project, but then we take it to the next level, which is how, with the information we get, we make that into a policy, into a management strategy, things like that. So yes, that's a little bit about me, and we're working on several different projects, but we mostly focus on certain specific branches like sustainable management, sustainable livelihoods to support and develop different alternatives for local communities, control and surveillance in terms of law enforcement within the islands, and eventually, and that's like our bigger goal, it's support management for the environmental authority.
So one thing I think our audience would be interested in, and I'm really interested in the United States, most of our national parks were established, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and there weren't places where once they were formed, people were living. We're kind of wrestling now with the whole history of removal of Native Americans and how that's tied into the establishment of our national parks. But it's just interesting to think of the Galapagos, which is a national park, right? And it includes a marine part of the park as well. But there's people living there. And I don't know if before I was researching for our conversation that there's so many people living there. Did I read that right? That there's over 30,000 people living in the Galapagos?
Yeah, so there's approximately 25,000 to 30,000 people living in the islands. Galapagos was actually the first national park in Ecuador.
Oh, wow.
It has two protected areas, the national park and the marine reserve. And recently there's a new marine reserve which is located in the economic exclusive zone of the islands, Hermandad Marine Reserve, and Jocotoco played a crucial role in the declaration of that new marine reserve. And yes, just like you mentioned, something that I loved about Galapagos, I'm also a naturalist guide, and something that I used to tell my travelers when they visited is that what made for me Galapagos special is that usually you have like a protected area within a big city or within a big, usually the protected area is the smaller part in comparison to the inhabited island. So in the Galapagos, it's the opposite. So out of the 100% of the territory, 97% is protected and only 3% it's allowed for human development. Wow. So basically we're living within a protected area. Wow. So that's how I think that you've developed this connection with nature, because you literally are living surrounded by it. Sure. And you live your day by day with, like sea lions sitting next to you, and you actually sometimes have to walk right next to them to get through them.
Surf around them,
yeah.
Wow. So do the people, in the Galapagos, the people don't technically live in the national park, they're just surrounded by the national park, right?
Yes, correct. So 97% is protected, and then that area, it's under the management of the Galapagos National Park Directorate, and then the other 3%, it's managed by the Galapagos government council. So Galapagos, according to the constitution, has like a special regime. So we have a special law. So it's like almost like a country within a country. So we have specific laws, restrictions. Somehow living in an island always have some restrictions, but it's totally worth it.
I love that it's such a small part that people can be in. I've done some work in the Bukatima Nature Preserve. I wasn't there, but that's in Singapore, and it's sort of the opposite, where Singapore is all developed, and they have this tiny little square of this super crazy, highly diverse, rainforest area. So it sounds like the exact opposite of what's going on in the Galapagos. So yeah, that's pretty amazing.
I was going to say one of the things, Paula mentioned it, but we helped get established and then create the management plan for this massive new marine reserve just a year ago that connects Galapagos to Cocos Island in Costa Rica. So like this migratory corridor for rays and sharks and whales and sea turtles.
Can you guys actually explain what what that means, like what's limited in those areas?
What's a marine reserve?
Yeah.
So Hermandad, it's located at the north part of the Galapagos, and just as Jean mentioned, the idea of establishing this protected area was to protect a migratory route for several species, but particularly whale sharks, hammerhead sharks, leatherback turtles, that use this area as a swimway to go from Galapagos to Cocos Island, right? So what we are trying to do here is to protect these species from threats that they face in international waters, even in the economic exclusive zone. So this new protected area has two areas. One, it's a responsible fishing area where longline is forbidden. And then the other area, it's a complete no-take zone. So in this way, we are protecting these species, right? There's a long way still for protection in different parts of the economic exclusive zone, but Ecuador in general has played a key role in the region, in all the countries from the marine, from the Pacific, Eastern Tropical Pacific, in protecting these key habitats like marine corridors.
Wow.
And
I think we're just so used to terrestrial tracts of land and thinking about corridors that way that it's, I mean, it makes perfect sense, but I really haven't thought about it in the way of the ocean, very much so.
And can we give the audience, I just want to make sure, we've described it, it's part of Ecuador, which is in South America. But do I have it right that Galapagos is about 600 miles off the coast? It straddles the equator, right?
Yes, it's about 600 miles west from Ecuador, from mainland Ecuador.
And how many islands?
13 big islands. So in total, we have 234 between islands, islets, and rocks. 234, but it's like 13 big islands, and 4 of them are inhabited. So we have Santa Cruz, San Cristobal, the capital, Isabela, the biggest island, and where I live, that's like the economic hub of the islands, and it's right in the center of the archipelago, and it's the most touristic island. And then we have the capital, San Cristobal, and we also have Floreana, with a very small population living there, and every island has its own charm.
So most of the islands are uninhabited then?
Most of them are.
Oh, wow. Okay. So when tourists come, do they stick to like certain islands usually, or do they cover a lot of the islands?
So tourism in the islands it's also regulated by the Galapagos National Park Directorate, and I think they've made a great job in managing tourism within the protected area. So there are specific itineraries, places you can go, places you cannot go, regulations such as that you need to visit all these places with a naturalist guide. And then there's also local tourism, land-based tourism, like in town where there's people living, so you have access to places that are closer to the inhabited areas where you don't necessarily need a guide for every single place, but everything is very well structured and managed, and it's thought to protect what we have, because basically our livelihoods depend on the integrity of the ecosystem. It's a nature-based tourism, so if we don't protect it, then that's what at least 80% of the population depends on tourism.
Wow.
So it's the biggest industry.
It's the biggest industry together with fisheries. So in Galapagos, we only have artisanal fisheries. So
what is an artisanal fishery?
An artisanal fisherman. Okay. Good question. Let me think how to define it.
Why did I ask? Only because I helped write a grant 2 weeks ago, and the idea of an artisanal fisher is not in my head. So I started to write the grant. What does that mean? Do they make paintings of fish? What is it?
So what I mean by that, industrial fisheries, like big scale fisheries, are not allowed in the island. So artisanal fisheries means small scale fishers. We only use sustainable fishing methods. Everything is regulated by the park. We only have small boats. So that's pretty much the idea, the concept of an artisanal fisheries, and it's mostly for mostly for local consumption, for the tourism industry, local consumption, and part of it also fishermen are exporting to mainland Ecuador, etc. But basically it's a small scale, mostly coastal fisheries.
Good question.
How did you guys heard of artists? You never heard. You know that?
I assumed what it meant, but I think I was pretty clear.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, just out of curiosity, just because we do focus on various species, and it kind of sometimes helps give an image for what people are catching. But what types of species are people kind of most going for?
So if you look at the Galapagos National Park logo, I think that's a pretty great description of what usually people travels there for. So I like to say that the logo, it's basically a giant tortoise surfing on top of a hammerhead shark. So if you can Google the logo, you'll see what I'm talking about. So yeah, those are our two iconic species. So for the Galapagos National Park, the iconic species is the giant tortoise. And for the Galapagos Marine Reserve, our iconic species is the hammerhead shark. So yeah, those are the most wanted species when you travel there. But then there's a whole bunch different species and biodiversity. And what makes Galapagos special, it's the high level of endemism that we have in the island. And by endemism, before Gigi asks,
I was right there behind you.
please ask.
I was like, what is endemic? I've heard of embolism, but it's a tree thing, but also a human thing. So yeah.
So that means a species that you can find only in a specific place like the Galapagos. So you find those species nowhere else in the world but in the Galapagos. So a good example of that is actually the giant tortoise, but then we also have other examples like from plants, from mammals, marine mammals like our sea lions. Both of the species that we have in the islands are endemic of there. Most of our reptiles in the islands are 100% endemic from the islands. So yeah, there's a whole diversity of things that you can find there, and this also changes depending when you visit Galapagos. So you have these 2 different seasons that are quite different in terms of temperature, species that you will find, but it's like going to nature and expect the unexpected, you know.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention too, but we actually have our own reserve in the Galapagos too. So most of it's a national park, but we have a reserve that we use, we own. There's nesting populations of Galapagos petrels, so the endangered seabird nest there. We manage and monitor and make sure that their nests are successful. We do a lot of things with seabirds, don't we?
Yes, we work with Galapagos petrels, which is a critically endangered endemic species. We also work with waved albatross, also critically endangered, and they're considered endemic of the islands. We're working also with penguins, so we have a whole different variety of projects that we're currently working on, from big ecosystems like Floreana, that we'll probably get to discuss, coral reefs, specific species, and then how do we incorporate all that data, all that information into decision making, like how the work that we are supporting helps to protect the islands.
Wow.
And I think that this is a good spot to start talking about what's happening on Floreana, if you guys are ready. But before we do that, since we just talked about endemism, I think it's important to mention for our audience, in case there's listeners that don't know, why the Galapagos is, on everyone's radar in terms of evolution, natural history, and why islands are such a hotbed for endemism. So, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Galapagos is known as Darwin's lab, basically. It played a crucial role for famous Charles Darwin in developing his theory of evolution. And it's like a natural research center for me. That's how I envision the island. It's like a natural research center. You go and you start asking questions, and there's a lot of things always to study, to explain, to understand. Then, because we are located so far from mainland, we are geographically like isolated. So evolution, it's a process that over time, over hundreds of years, you are one of the ways to get to these theories that you are so, let's say, put it in simple words, so apart from mainland that you eventually, with enough time and change, certain species become different enough to be considered a different species. So that's, in very simple words, the process that happens in the islands and why we have so many different species. Like, just to give you an example that I always find very interesting, there are some species that have an evolutionary history longer than what we know that the islands have existed. So one good example are the marine iguanas. We have the only iguanas in the world that actually swim and dive up to 30 meters depth to get their food. And we know
hold
the
on.
islands.
If I've left to highlight for the audience, 30 meters they dive?
Yeah, we have registers of marine iguanas, big males diving at that depth. Yeah, it's not the common thing, but
Right.
there's always that individual that
Right. Pushes it.
Yeah. And so the islands are constantly moving, right? So the islands themselves are the result of a hotspot that is sitting under the west side of the archipelago, and this hotspot is pretty active. So the islands are constantly moving, but we still have enough activity, and the islands are moving towards southeast direction, towards mainland, and eventually they are little by little sinking. So now we know there are some seamounts under the ocean that at some point they were above the surface, and probably they were the Galapagos of hundreds and thousands of years ago. And so it's a pretty interesting process that we might not see it in our lifetime, but we know it's happening there, and that's what makes these islands so special for me. Like, it's so unique, so different than what we are used to, and everything has its own its own process, its own history. And now with genetics, also science is changing, and with genetics we are discovering that some species that we didn't know were different species are actually completely different from their ancestors, so they are considered different species. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the perfect segue to talking about Floreana. So because of this isolation, we get these wonderfully unique endemic species. But the flip side of that is because they are on these isolated remote areas, when disturbances come in, it can be devastating, because there's no way for those populations, or very limited ways for those populations, to find refuge from disturbances or to be repopulated from nearby populations, because they're on these isolated islands. If the listeners were interested in all of this, I'd say recommend they look up island biogeography theory. There's just lots of super interesting information on islands, and not just in the water, but over the decades we've learned that islands of habitat, even in terrestrial systems, function under similar concepts. Just this past year, we've done 2 episodes on endemic species, one on the Florida panther, which isn't on an island in the water, but it's in an island of habitat in southern Florida. So that species has suffered similar consequences from isolation. And then we just recorded one, haven't released it yet, an episode on the Cayman Island blue iguana, which became critically endangered, and that people have worked to bring back, but now they're struggling because they're still dealing with island-based introduced predators. So, Floreana, do I have it right that there were no human settlements there before pirates and fishermen came there from Europe? Is that right?
Yes. I don't know if you want to go first, Eugene, and talk about Floreana, and then I can give details. And insights.
You have to tell it in a very romantic way.
I'm going to do my
romance in terms of adventure.
So Floreana is the 6th largest island in the Galapagos. And 160 people live there today.
Right.
It's mostly a national park, like the other islands. Like the other Galapagos Islands, Floreana has and had many unique species that evolved either just on the Galapagos or on Floreana itself, where they either exist only on the Galapagos as a whole, or they only exist on Floreana. And 200 years ago, whalers, pirates started coming in. And weirdly enough, these whalers and pirates, they ate all of the Floreana giant tortoises. So a specific giant tortoise that only existed on Floreana, they came in, they ate them all.
It was easy to catch.
It was easy to catch.
A lot of food.
A lot of food. Apparently it tastes good. I don't know. Does it taste good? I haven't had one yet.
Stored for a long time.
yeah. But they also brought with them, the same whalers and pirates brought with them other problems, introduced invasive predators like rats and mice. And the rats and mice ate the young and the eggs of all the other wildlife on Floreana. And so lots of species disappeared, lots of wildlife unique to this island, birds, a snake, the tortoise, they disappeared from the island. What we're doing on Floreana, and we're doing this with a lot of partners, the National Park Service, is we're bringing back the wildlife that disappeared from Floreana hundreds of years ago, generations ago. And we're doing that with this incredible technology by removing these invasive species. And part of the story, sort of what's really cool, is several years ago, they discovered that the Floreana giant tortoise still exists, but on another island. So what must have happened is these whalers and pirates must have said, we're going to be hungry next week. Let's bring some tortoises with us. They left them on another island, and they were still there. So the tortoise didn't go extinct. But it did breed with other tortoises, so it's not 100% Floreana giant tortoise. Mm-hmm. Captive breeding and program ensued. That's what we're going to start off by reintroducing to Floreana. Tortoises are environmental engineers. They make the conditions right for the other species. We've been removing the invasive rats and mice. We're nearly done with that. Once we have the invasive rats and mice gone, we're going to bring back the tortoise and then 11 other species. Darwin's finches, a hawk, an owl, a snake, a Floreana mockingbird. So the Floreana mockingbird is known as Darwin's muse. And the mockingbird existed and survived on small islands outside of Floreana where there were no rats and mice. Some of these other species only exist on the other larger Galapagos islands. They're all endemic to the Galapagos or Floreana itself. And so right now we're raising money for that next phase of work, the species reintroductions. So I joked about fundraising, but certainly that is something we need to do right now. We need to raise money. We need about $2.8 million for this next phase. We've already raised $2 million. So you out there, listeners, you can donate. You can make this happen. You can bring back a Floreana giant tortoise. Maybe you can name one if you give us a lot of money. I'm happy to discuss that with you. But we're raising money this year so that we can begin reintroductions. And you can go to our website, jocotoco.org, to find more information to donate. And again, Jocotoco is with a J, not an H. So that's hopefully was that compelling?
It's super compelling, and obviously we're gonna remind everyone at the end. But this is something that I need to understand because I don't think we actually touched on it yet. When I think of an ecosystem engineer, we think of like beavers, and there's a number of examples. In what way is the tortoise doing this?
I can answer it, but they eat vegetation, they spread seeds, they disturb the soil, and all these things create the conditions that are right for the species that disappeared as well.
Yeah, so they're like, just as Eugene mentioned, they are like the engineers of the ecosystems. They are our main herbivores. So in land areas, we have basically land iguanas and giant tortoises are our main seed dispersals. So they play a key role for vegetation in the islands. When they were removed, this caused an unbalanced in the ecosystem, and so the idea now is to bring them back so they can play that ecological role that they have in these islands, right? And just as Eugene mentioned, the crazy thing is that we are capable of reintroducing them because we found tortoises from Floreana Island in a completely different island at the west side of the archipelago in Isabela, and now the park started a reproduction program in captivity of these tortoises, and eventually that's the species that we will start our rewilding phase of the program early next year with reptiles, with giant tortoises. And just as I mentioned, they are not only ecologically important, but also in terms of livelihoods. It's one of our iconic species, one of the species that people travels there to see. So for tourism, that will also be a benefit because the community there also benefits from tourism. So it's both. I think it's a key ecological role, but also a key community. It has a key community importance for the island.
Win-win.
Yeah, I feel like Bill and I come from a background where we've read a lot of Edward Abbey, and I feel like there's an Edward Abbey thing to bring into this, where he was saying like how man needs nature, right? But he also needs society and people, and it sounds like the tortoise is kind of like a nice. I don't want to degrade it to a metaphor, but it's like it's a really good encapsulation of that idea in a sense. So.
And this is so it's the largest rewilding effort on the Galapagos ever, and it's actually one of the largest and most important rewilding efforts on any inhabited tropical island in the entire world. And I'm a fundraiser, and I'm going to name drop just a second, but to make this really exciting, I mean, people like Bezos and DiCaprio, I mean, their foundations they have given to this project because of how important it is.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's Jeff Bezos.
Jeff Bezos.
And Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah, me and Leo, you want to talk to Leo?
Yeah.
I'll share his cell phone, but not going to record it.
Okay. Paula, can you talk a little bit about the first phase of the project? Because just reading about preparing, I was impressed by how much, I don't know if you want to call it prep work, was done before introduced species were starting to be removed. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so first phase, 12 years of preparation, 12 years of planning, 12 years of fundraising, 12 years of making sure that every single possible consideration was taken into account. For this process, working with the communities have been key because they've been involved in every single part of designing the project. So to be able to be where we are right now, we have to put together some environmental assessments, environmental plan, eradication safeguards, social safeguards. So a lot of different aspects that you don't think they're there until you really start getting serious about, okay, we're doing the most ambitious eradication program in tropical islands. And so after 12 years, we were finally ready to start. And again, simple things that you may think are very simple, but they're not. So for instance, just to give you a quick sample, the pilots of the helicopters that we used for the aerial dispersal flew all the way from New Zealand because they're specialized in eradication programs, and so they had to come all the way from New Zealand to Galapagos to fly these helicopters in a very specific way, in a straight line, so we make sure that we followed all the procedures in the right way. And so that takes time. That takes a lot of planning, a lot of again, we are inside a protected area, so we have to comply with all the regulations and requirements from the environmental authority, and we work with them for that to happen. So yes, like we are about to start the rewilding phase, and again, all of this has been conducted with the community. Like we have not done anything that the community has not been aware of. And actually the project itself has another important community which is actually supporting livelihood. So due to introduced species, agriculture was also impacted because rats and mice will eat everything before people had time to harvest them. So after the eradication phase was completed, farmers are reporting that they, after years, are finally getting a good harvest from their crops.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So as part of the project, before starting the eradication phase, we built stables, we built places where people could keep their harvest, and we did that for every single farmer in the island. So the project goes beyond the ecological part. It also involves a huge work with the communities. And now we have to work with them, so we make sure that what we are doing right now will last.
Right.
Because now it comes right that there's people visiting the island every day. There's food coming to the islands every once in a while, not every day, but every once in a while. And so we have to keep working with them to make sure that this project lasts in times.
It was interesting that you said the experts for this type of removal came from New Zealand, because I couldn't help but make the connection between the Galapagos and New Zealand, who also has many species that are poorly adapted to predators like rats, So I'm assuming that's why they're the experts, right? Because they've also had to deal with.
Well, they came in primarily. So I mean, truthfully, the experts are like our staff. Paula, Eliezer, Victor Carrion, who our director of the Galapagos program grew up on Floreana. He's one of the 160 people that grew up there. He became the governor of the Galapagos, province. He's one of the most renowned conservationists in all of Latin America at this point. The New Zealanders, they were the ones who had the helicopters.
Oh,
we told them what to do.
I see. So they had some of the hardware.
Yeah.
Yes.
I see.
Yeah.
But obviously, you guys on the ground, actually they are going to be the experts. But
Yeah.
I wanted to mention one thing too about the getting rid of the rats and the mice. So can you imagine? It's very complicated. Right? Can you imagine, I have a mouse in my apartment and it's been there for a year and I can't get that mouse. I can't get the mouse, right?
Oh, yeah.
So imagine you're on an island. What is it, 17,000 hectares?
Yes.
Which is 45,000 acres or something. It's a big island. And it's volcanic and there's cliffs and caves and vegetation and mountains. How do you find the rats and mice? So we had this incredible system of technology, advanced technology, to help us find the rats and mice. A grid of camera traps that can see the rats or mice, and then also an AI program that can identify them and tell us where they are when that camera trap sees them. We have drones that have video that have infrared heat seeking. They can identify, at night, rats and mice using these drones.
When you first described this to me, I thought they were drones actually going out and using heat to kill the thing.
Heat-seeking drones
that
to
is
get
so
the rats
cool.
and mice.
So it was a little bit of a letdown.
That would be cool.
But yeah, I could imagine just the logistics of hunting down all of these predators and figuring out where they are and how to access them and get rid of them.
Yeah.
Why it took 12, at least a lot of those 12 years to do
Planning.
so. Yeah.
And in the press release, is this where I read that there was special protections for many of the finch species?
Oh yeah, so that was part of the 12 years of planning. So before starting the bait dispersal, we had to protect, just in case, just as this was a safeguard, a species or individuals from a specific species, such as Darwin finches, for instance. Short-eared owl. So we built aviaries where we kept a small population of these finches that were kept in captivity until the dispersal phase was done. Once this was over, when was that? Was this in March?
This is March.
Yeah, in March. We released back to nature over 500 individuals of Darwin finches. So that was our first, that was hope.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Proof that it was working.
Exactly.
These 500 finches, they were already on Floreana. They hadn't disappeared.
Right.
Some species of finches had, along with other things. But to protect them, we kept them in aviaries because we were killing rats and mice. We wanted to keep the finches and the owls safe while we're doing that. We brought them back, and now they're nesting successfully, and so it's proof that this is working.
But I think that's a beautiful part of the fact that you involved so many experts, especially local experts, in figuring out the whole process over a long period of time. These questions of, we don't know what we don't know. What do we need to be aware of? And I can't imagine of trying to get all those moving pieces and kind of predicting in the future what might happen, and just being in that conversation where someone said, I think we're going to have to capture all these birds and bring them in. And I imagine some people are like,
where are we going to put them?
Right. But in order for it to work, Like that had to be done.
And the risk is so high. I mean, if you make a mistake on Floreana, it's you cause the extinction of one of Darwin's finches. Like, we don't want that to be the article.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why it took 12 years of planning, right? Like
Right.
understanding how the ecosystem works, understanding what are the unexpected consequences and what we should do in order for that not to happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was tough, it was hard, but I think that we did a great teamwork, and this wouldn't have been possible unless we didn't work with the national park, with the biosecurity agency. The project is co-executed by Jocotoco and island conservation. So we've made up this very inclusive, I would say, and diverse teamwork. So we take every single piece of the project into account to make sure it works.
Yeah.
So
Just really quick, I was just thinking, like, because a lot of times when you think about these popular animals, right, that many people, maybe many non-biologists may know, a lot of people have heard of Darwin's finches, not only from Darwin, but I know Peter and Rosemary Grant, which are pretty popular researchers in the Galapagos, also did a lot of research and writing on Darwin's finches, which it's been a while since I've read any of their stuff, but I remember seeing them talk, so that was kind of a nice, like a nice little sort of introduction to the area. But what would they be, like, charismatic mini fauna? Because I mean, in the grand scheme, they're kind of big compared to some animals.
Well, and I would say the Darwin's finches generally aren't even charismatic. they're cool because of what they are in their history, right?
Right.
Their beaks are different sizes because of what they eat.
they have
Charismatic names.
They have inner beauty.
Yeah, right. They have inner beauty.
Yeah. But I just mean that they're popular in a sense.
Yeah.
Regardless if someone knows if they can draw one or not, like a lot of people have heard of them anyway.
For
so
sure.
yeah.
So you've gone through these 12 years of getting rid of the introduced species. So now moving forward, like, ideally, what's going to happen? You've mentioned that the tortoises are going to be reintroduced. What's like the timeline, and then what's going to happen after that, ideally?
Well, if everything goes as planned, we are expecting to reintroduce at least 200 tortoises starting next year, and at least 400 Galapagos snakes over a 2 to 3 years period of time. So those are the two species that we will start with, because the national park has a long history of conservation projects with reptiles, so that's the one that we have the most experience with. So that's why one of the reasons why we are starting with reptiles, and then from that point on we will slowly start reintroducing other species such as the Floreana mockingbird, vermilion flycatchers.
Did you say short-eared owl earlier too?
Yes.
Wow, it's so funny to hear about the overlap in species. I used to help ban short-eared owls here not here, all the way in Buffalo. So,
But short-eared owls aren't one of the ones you're going to be reintroducing, right?
Not reintroducing, but right now we are keeping a population. Well, yes and no. We're keeping a population of short-eared owls in aviaries as well. Just to make sure that they are okay until the eradication phase is over, and once it's completely over, we will reintroduce them. So another thing to take into account is that the bait that we use, it's completely safe. It's safe for most of the animals, but reptiles in particular, they accumulate that, and we don't know what the effect could be of a short-eared owl eating a lava lizard that could have potentially eaten the bait, even though it doesn't affect the lava lizards, we don't know what the effect could be for the short-eared owl, so we're not releasing them until we are sure that it's 100% safe.
wow, yeah.
And I imagine the short-eared owl there would be a subspecies, or
Is it considered a full species? It's definitely an endemic subspecies.
Subspecies.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same species, right?
If I had to guess, it would be. If I was going to guess, and I really hope I'm right about this, I want to know if it's measurably smaller than our short-eared owls.
Do you know?
Sure.
Because it tends to be the case, well, among species as you migrate north, that they get a little bigger, especially because they like to hang out in cold
Lee,
areas.
you'll have to come.
Yeah.
All right.
And I'll bring one of ours.
No introducing species.
Immediately arrested.
You get arrested.
Hey,
All sorts of reasons.
no publicity is bad publicity.
Yeah.
So beyond those, can you give us an idea of some of the other species that are going to be reintroduced?
Oh yeah, so we have the Floreana Giant Tortoise, that's the one that we're going to be starting with. The Floreana Mockingbird, that's probably one of my favorites. We were just talking about Darwin finches, and identifying finches, it's so difficult, and I'm saying this as a naturalist guide. It's so difficult that even Darwin himself got it wrong when he first came to the Galapagos, right? He identified these finches as different species. He thought some of them were finches, warblers, but turns out at the end it turned out they were all finches. But the mockingbird, if you look at the 4 species of mockingbirds that we have in Galapagos, you can definitely tell that all 4 of them are mockingbirds, but they are completely different between one another. So that's what in principle got Darwin's attention, to say, okay, what's happening? Why are they different if they're the same species? You know?
Is this the muse that you were talking about?
Yes. And if you look at the Floreana mockingbird, that's the one that is completely different from all the other 3. So that's probably one of my favorite species that we are reintroducing from islets that are nearby Floreana, where there are still mockingbirds there. The little vermilion flycatcher, it's this incredible red-chested bird, amazing. Galapagos rail, lava gulls, Galapagos hawk, other species of finches like vegetarian finch, the gray warble finch. So again, we're not just recovering the ecosystem, but also adding value to the island that the tourism industry will also benefit out of it, right? Barn owl, so we have the short-eared owl and the barn owl, and the Floreana razor snake that we will also start next year with the giant tortoises. So those are 12 species that are locally extinct in the island, but survives in islets very close to Floreana. So that's where we will be reintroducing the species from.
And do you have any idea, like, is there a plan for how long this is going to take?
Yes. So again, along the road, there are always,
Detours.
Exactly. But if everything goes as planned, I could say in the next 5 to 7 years, there are some species that are more difficult to work with than others, and that we have to be very careful with. So we're still developing some of these plans, reintroduction plans. The ones that are ready are the ones that I already mentioned with reptiles, but with birds especially, it's a little bit more complicated. So just more things to consider before starting with them.
Is one of those things that, do the birds tend to stick to an island, or are they migrating from island to island?
That's the thing, right? Because, for example, the mockingbird, it's so close from Floreana that they could just fly in. So let's see once we reintroduce them if they stay or if they fly back. But in theory, we are doing this for them, right? So if they don't longer have these threats that they used to, and that weren't making the population successful, they should be able to thrive again in what used to be their home.
So this would just be a potential range expansion for them, but you're releasing some there to maybe try to kickstart it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to share about what Jocotoco is doing on Floreana?
Sure. So ecological restoration, we are trying to our approach for ecological restoration, we are trying to work at a landscape level. So specifically for Floreana, our focus is to ecological restore from ridge to reef, basically. So we're working in every single square meter of the island, but we are also considering the marine part. So we have a coral reef restoration initiative. It's called Galapagos Reef Revival. So the idea is that with lessons learned from this project in Isabela, we can also replicate the work to Floreana to restore a coral reef area that lost almost 70-80% of the coral reef area after a very strong El Niño event. So with this, we will be talking about an integral ecological restoration of the island, not only in the land portion, but also in the marine area.
I like that, from reef to ridge. That's a nice picture.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
And Jean, I think you need to make sure that our listeners leave with an important message.
Oh, sure. So, when I first started working for Jocotoco in December, one of the very first things that I was doing was writing up a story about Floreana and this project. And, if you asked me when I was 5 years old what I wanted to do when I was a grown-up, I would have said this. I literally would have said work in the Galapagos, work in the Amazon, do everything that Jocotoco was doing.
I would have said be a Power Ranger.
Be a Power Ranger when you were 5? No, I was like, I want to save turtles. I want to save tortoises.
Well, we are built different.
And so to write up this story, I had to call one of our staff on Floreana. And I speak Spanish, not fluently, but I speak enough Spanish. And so one night, it's like late December, I'm in DC in my living room, it's dark, it's like 7 p.m. And I use WhatsApp to call Victor Carrion, who's on Floreana, ask him, interview him about the project. And, he picks up, and it's all Spanish. And I get 80% of it, 90% of it. He probably gets 80, 90% of what I'm saying, hopefully. I know, maybe less, who knows. But I can hear, the sea breeze. The Galapagos sea breeze in the background. I can hear the waves in the background. And it was just magic. It was just like, I can't believe this is what I'm doing right now. Talking to someone on a tiny little island in the middle of the ocean, the Galapagos of all places, about this incredible rewilding project, the most important rewilding project in the entire world. And that's what we're raising money for. We're trying to raise money so that we can bring back these species. We have to raise $2.8 million, hopefully by the end of this year. We've already raised $2 million. So if you can support it, please do. It's awesome work. The people are awesome, and I'm happy to be doing it.
And where should people go to do that?
Jocotoco.org. JOCOTOCO.org. There's a little donate button. You can find the Floreana project page on that website, and it should be easy to donate.
And we'll link that in our episode notes. And Steve and I haven't talked about it too much, but I'm sure on behalf of our patrons, we will definitely be making a donation too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Pleasure.
If we get a turtle, if we could name a turtle.
A tortoise.
A tortoise. I'll name one Steve. I'm going to name one Steve. I guarantee.
Okay. You have to come to Galapagos to name your turtles.
Oh, gosh.
So for the people that are interested in Galapagos and this project, you can also visit. Come visit our Jocotoco network, including Galapagos.
That's a dream of mine.
Yeah. That'd be awesome.
Love to. Well, thank you all for taking time out of your busy week here in New York. I know you all have a lot going on. Thank you for inviting us. You gave us an excuse to call into work, and and we're sick, and explore New York City. So thank you all around.
Yeah.
And please keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much.
All right, folks, we hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as we did. It was wonderful to sit down with Jean, Julieta, Paula, and they were nice enough to take us out to lunch after.
Oh, yeah.
And then Steve and I got to explore New York City for a day and a half.
Yeah.
We got to see the Statue of Liberty.
Uh-huh.
Right?
What was that natural path that we were on?
Oh, the High Line.
The High Line.
So
that was cool.
If you are in New York City, folks, we definitely recommend checking out the High Line. It's basically a nature path.
Right, I said natural path. It's I don't know about natural.
You should have gone to see a natural path.
Yeah.
It's a nature trail on an abandoned railway bridge through the city.
It's cool.
Yeah.
I didn't even know about it until we did it.
Right.
So
Yeah. So it was one of the highlights of our trip, beyond the interview, of course.
yeah.
All right, so we want to do our wrap up now, and first and foremost, we'd like to thank our growing list of Patreon supporters. So thank you to our newest patron, Elizabeth P.
And if you'd like to support the podcast, consider becoming a patron of our show at patreon.com. Because of support from our listeners, we've been able to make the show free and make cooler episodes like this one. Or you can make a one-time donation through PayPal on our website. So thank you to listener Robert B. for his generous donation. Thank you. And don't forget that we have Field Guides merch available through our website store at thefieldguidespodcast.com. And remember, if you can't financially support the podcast, you can help out by sharing it with friends and family and by subscribing and leaving us a review wherever you get your podcasts. It helps spread the word and allows us to reach a wider audience. We'd like to thank our newest iTunes reviewer and apparently also professional biologist Britt N67.
Yeah, she put that in her comment that she's a biologist. And come enjoy our sporadic posts on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or whatever they're calling Twitter these days. And you can always email us ideas for episode topics, criticisms, or your stories of personal encounters with nonprofit organizations to thefieldguides@gmail.com. And remember, parents, get those kids outside. Let them flip over rocks, let them get muddy, let them get dirty. And if you don't have kids, please make some time to get yourselves outside. And folks, thank you for listening.
See you next time.